Christmas 1992. A 14-year-old girl kisses her family goodbye, steps into the mist in her purple anorak, and vanishes. Johanna Young was heading out to meet a friend. She never came home. Her trainers were found neatly placed on a lonely lane, her body dragged through brambles, dumped face down in an icy pit at the edge of a lover's lane. Her jeans were missing, her skull cracked. She drowned while the village slept. Over 3 decades later, the killer or killers still walk free among the people who knew her best. Watton knows who did it, but why won't they talk? This is the unsolved murder that haunts a small village forever. Welcome to Crimes That Haunt Us. We release a new case every Sunday at 6 p.m, so hit subscribe and don't miss the next one. And let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. In the sleepy Norfolk village of Watton, population hovering around 6,000 in 1992, life revolved around the local abattoir, the biggest employer in town. It was into this small, tight-knit farming community that Johanna Young came into the world in 1978. Her parents, Robert and Carol Young, raised their family in a warm, cozy 4-bedroom home set back off Mortem Road, a little haven of ordinary family life. Robert had once earned a living as a TV and radio technician, but a serious back injury in the late 1980s had left him disabled and unable to work. Carol devoted herself to being a homemaker. Johanna had an older sister named Emma and a younger brother, Daniel, rounding out the close household. Johanna was the girl who seemed to carry sunshine with her, always bubbly, endlessly friendly, and bursting with life. She didn't have a care in the world, and she certainly had no enemies. A devoted animal lover, she cherished her pet gerbil, Squeak, whose cage sat proudly on top of her chest of drawers. Heavy rock music thumped through her headphones, and she was rarely without a sketchpad, her pencil dancing across pages as she drew whatever captured her imagination. She was a pupil at Wayland High School, conveniently located directly opposite the family home, so her world felt safely contained within the village boundaries. Evenings in the 1990s carried a predictable rhythm for the Watton teenagers. Around 6 p.m, children began drifting out of their front doors, drawn like moths to the town center, lounging on benches near the shops or along the high street. They talked, smoked, laughed, and idled away the hours in that quiet, gossipy bubble of rural youth where secrets rarely stayed secret for long. Johanna was a fixture in that scene, perched on those benches with her friends, navigating the messy, exhilarating business of being a teenager in a place where everyone knew your name and your business. For around half a year, Johanna had been utterly besotted with her older boyfriend, Ryan Furman. At 17, Ryan lived with his parents in Lovell Gardens, Watton, and worked long shifts as a butcher in the meat factory. They'd met at a nightclub in Durham, and from that moment, Johanna was hooked. She'd race home from school, skip whatever chores awaited, and hurried to intercept him on his walk back from the abattoir. So many evenings were spent curled up together in one house or the other. But teenage love can turn volatile in an instant. Just 2 days before tragedy had struck, they broke up, torn apart by increasingly fierce arguments. Typical of young relationships, the fights had escalated. Johanna kept the breakup hidden from her parents. In the lead-up to Christmas, she appeared genuinely happy once more. She had already bought and wrapped Christmas presents for her family and for Ryan, a signet ring engraved with the letter R. On the evening of Wednesday, December 23, 1992, her parents were in the living room, absorbed in the festive ritual of wrapping gifts, including the Sony Walkman they'd chosen with such excitement for Johanna, while also trying to help the youngest, Daniel, fix his computer game. Distracted by the holiday tasks, they didn't pay close attention as Johanna, already wearing her signature purple anorak, got ready to head out. That night, she did something peculiar. She took down every single one of her 50 Christmas cards from her bedroom wall. She then asked her mum, "Is it okay if I go out?" Carol answered, "Yes, but don't be late." Johanna told her she was going into town to meet a friend. She then left the house, looking her usual happy self. The night was unusually bitter, the air thick with a heavy fog. The streets lay almost deserted, conditions that would later cripple the police search for witnesses. And so at 7:30 p.m., Johanna stepped out of her house for the last time into the misty, fog-choked darkness. She was wearing her purple anorak, blue jeans, and black matchstick trainers. Standing at just 5 feet 4 inches tall, with brown hair and blue eyes, she vanished into the gloom. At 8:15 p.m. that evening, her school friend Justin Pike, aged 15, caught sight of her walking past the chip shop on Watton's High Street. He called out to her. Justin later said she looked moody, had turned toward him, ignored his greeting completely, and kept walking. The behavior was so out of character for the ever-friendly Johanna that it had stuck with him. Back home, as the hours dragged on with no sign of Johanna, a quiet anxiety began to settle over her parents. This was an era before mobile phones and the internet. Johanna was normally good about ringing their home landline if her plans ever changed, but they told themselves the thick fog must have kept her at a friend's house for the night. On the morning of December 24th, however, concern turned to dread. Johanna's alarm clock blared at 6 a.m. in her empty room. She had not come home for her paper round, a job she took seriously and never missed. Her father, Robert, rushed to the newsagents to see if she'd gone straight there from a friend's house, but she hadn't. Something was terribly wrong, and they knew it. A conscientious girl like Johanna would never abandon her round without a word. The Youngs began frantically calling Jo's friends, her boyfriend, and anyone they could think of, but no one had seen her. Panic gripped them. They reported her missing to the police. Together with officers, friends, and neighbors, they scoured Watton for any sign of her. Robert and others spent the whole day searching, but Johanna was nowhere to be seen. Then came Christmas Day. Robert and Carol had spent the whole day searching for Johanna. Again, they found nothing. At home, Johanna's Christmas present sat untouched under the tree, wrapped with love and never to be opened. On Boxing Day evening, a local man walking his dog stumbled upon a haunting sight. Johanna's black matchstick trainers placed neatly side by side on the verge of an unmade lane known locally as Gilman's Drift. Realizing their potential significance amid the ongoing search for local missing Johanna, he alerted the police at once. Police swarmed the area with tracker dogs. They recovered the trainers, then discovered Johanna's knickers discarded in the bushes nearby. Pushing further up the lane, at approximately 8:20 p.m., they reached a 5-bar gate. And beyond a dense wall of brambles, they looked into the dark waters of an old clay pit, rusty rainwater filled with rusting oil drums. And there, beneath the twisted claw of a crooked oak tree at the edge of Wayland Wood off Griston Road, a notorious lover's lane, they found her. Johanna floated face down, still clad in her purple anorak, but her jeans were gone, presumed taken by her killer. She was naked from the waist down. U-shaped drag marks scarred the ground leading to the pit, evidence she had been dragged there. Footprints remained pressed into the mud. Officers and forensics teams got to work, scouring for evidence. By 11 p.m., officers knocked on the Youngs' door, their heads bowed in sorrow. The family knew what was coming, yet the sheer brutality of their daughter's fate would shatter them beyond imagination. DI Michael Cole took charge of the investigation, immediately assigning upwards of 50 detectives to the case. They began the painstaking work of reconstructing her final hours. Back at the scene, forensics teams carried out a meticulous fingertip search, examining every mark in the mud, noting Johanna's footprints trailing halfway down the lane before abruptly stopping, taking plaster casts of numerous other prints and tire marks in the desperate hope one would belong to the killer. A major house-to-house inquiry was launched, detectives knocking on every door in the area. Several sightings surfaced, including a man who had walked up Gilman's Drift just after 11 o'clock on the night Johanna had vanished. His dog had heard someone stumbling in the darkness, and so he ran back home to fetch a torch, but when he had returned, the night was silent again. He had no idea who he had heard. They were gone. The post-mortem revealed that Johanna Young had drowned, but severe skull fractures were also present, consistent with a fall. It was discovered that Johanna had an unusually thin skull, making skull fractures far more likely from any type of blunt force trauma. The freezing water prevented any reliable time of death estimate, and prolonged submersion destroyed any chance of recovering trace evidence. There were no clear physical signs of sexual assault, yet the pathologist concluded the murder appeared sexually motivated. Scratches covered her back, marks consistent with being dragged across rough terrain through the briars and brambles. The killer was likely left bloodied and scratched himself, and almost certainly knew the area well to choose such a secluded lover's lane for disposal. Suspicion quickly zeroed in on her ex-boyfriend Ryan Furman. He would be interviewed at length several times. He told police that they had been very close, spending most evenings together. He described Johanna as very sensitive to how others saw her, and that she would grow deeply paranoid if she believed friends were talking about her. He admitted he had ended the relationship 2 days earlier because he wanted more time with his friends and their motorbikes, plus the arguments had become constant. Still, he said, they were planning to reconcile in January. He displayed genuine grief, guilt, and sadness. Mutual friends confirmed they had seemed very close and happy until recently, and that Ryan had been the one to call it off. Police interviewed him several more times, searched his room, seized clothing for blood and mud analysis, but found nothing of evidential value. He also bore no scratches or injuries. After a cumulative 9¼ hours of questioning, and having a cast-iron alibi from multiple friends as having played snooker on the evening in question, he was officially eliminated as a suspect. He had cooperated voluntarily throughout. Investigators began to theorize that Johanna had left home that Wednesday evening intending to call at Ryan's house, and that she had been intercepted, attacked, and murdered along the way. On December 27th, Ryan spoke to the Sun newspaper, where he blamed himself for her death because of the breakup. He believed that she had been abducted that evening while likely heading to his house to try and make things right. On December 30th, police divers then searched the pit once more as a large-scale sweep of the surrounding area continued. Johanna's jeans remained missing, almost certainly holding vital evidence. The next day, December 31st, a witness then called to police to report that they had also came across a pair of black matchstick trainers placed neatly in a hedgerow about a mile from Johanna's home at 10:30 a.m. on Christmas Eve, likely the same spot along Gilman's Drift. At the time, they thought nothing of it. The murder appeals changed that. Police were then able to narrow down the murder window to between 8:15 p.m. on the evening of the 23rd and the morning of Christmas Eve. Also on December 31st, the News of the World announced a £10,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of Johanna's killer. That same day, the Eastern Daily Press in Norwich received an anonymous handwritten sketch showing a man and a woman standing by a motorcycle with the words "Griston Road, Watton, 23rd December, 9 p.m. The postcard is then forwarded to forensics for analysis, but its sender would remain untraced to this day. On the 3rd of January into the new year, detectives renewed their public appeal, admitting that the response from the close-knit farming village had been poor. They believed people in Watton knew who was responsible but were shielding them. Part of the problem was small-town pride. People who had never been in trouble with the law didn't want to be seen walking into a police station or becoming involved. This came after an emotional appeal from Father Robert Young, who pleaded once more for anyone to please come forward with information. Then came a local dog walker who contacted police to say that he had seen a young woman matching Johanna's description standing at the entrance to Gilman's Drift with a youth leaning against a motorbike on a foggy December evening. Another witness offered a potentially crucial lead. At around 9 p.m. on the foggy evening of December 23rd, at the junction of Griston Road and Norwich Road on the outskirts of Watton, a 27-year-old man driving home had saw a young woman who matched Johanna's description arguing heatedly with a man seated in a silver-colored van, possibly a Luton-style van. The pair were gesturing wildly, voices raised in what appeared to be a tense dispute. The witness knew her by sight from the local area but could not positively identify her as Johanna. The witness provided the name of the man he believed to be the driver to detectives, but it is not known whether they made investigative contact with this alleged driver. The witness himself was interviewed at least twice early in the inquiry and had provided a DNA sample during mass screening of local men, though he was never treated as a suspect. On January 4th, detectives disclosed that the killer had likely returned to the scene in an attempt to conceal the body, covering the floating corpse with loose vegetation pulled from bushes around the pit, an act, they say, that would have taken some time. 2 days later, January 6th, police staged a reconstruction of Johanna's last movements. Calls flooded the incident room, but officers reiterated their conviction. The killer was definitely local and was being protected by others in the Watton village. On January 9th, a heartbroken Ryan Furman visited the murder scene for the first time, shielding his face from the press cameras to hide his tears. He told reporters he was unable to come to terms with what had happened. He recalled fondly how he had first spotted her in a nightclub 6 months earlier. She had stood out because she was so strikingly good-looking. He proudly showed off an engraved signet ring that Johanna had bought him on the day that they had broken up. He tells reporters that he had bought her a lovely satin pajama set in return. He insisted that they had been planning to get back together. On January 19th, police made a startling discovery. Johanna's jeans lay strewn on a bush by Griston Road. Detectives discovered that they had been washed, removing any trace DNA. Police deduced that the killer almost certainly took the jeans because he believed his DNA was on them, washed them to remove any evidence, then returned them later. The knickers, which were recovered on Boxing Day along with the shoes, also produced no secondary DNA. The jeans had not been there during the earlier thorough forensic searches. They must have been placed there later. Police now believed the killer had returned with an accomplice to try to conceal the body. In February 1993, there was a brief surge of hope. An arrest. This man would become the main suspect during the inquiry, a 20-year-old local known for selling cannabis to Watton's younger teenagers. He is said to have been importing the cannabis from Thetford. He lived near Johanna on Mortem Road. He was held for 3 days before being released without charge after refusing to comment. Suspicion had centered on circumstantial evidence, reports of deep scratches on his hands and arms. Officers linked them to the bramble-covered terrain around the pit, plus his reputation for violence. He had once broken a youth's finger and threatened another with a knife, and he had a minor prior criminal record. Local teens had told police that he had fancied Johanna massively and may have heard about her breakup with Ryan that evening and decided to make his move. His alibi was that he had been at home all evening on December 3rd with his mother, who backed him up, though she later remarked that she don't remember things very well. Police examined his car, but he claimed it wasn't even roadworthy that night because the clutch had failed. In November 1993, he had appeared in court on unrelated driving offences. His solicitor told the court that the intense scrutiny and suspicion surrounding Johanna's murder had placed enormous pressure on him, saying he had effectively been treated and convicted by the people of Watton. In his arrest interview, he had denied the scratches and insisted he barely knew Johanna, just to say hello to. Nothing was ever proven against the man, and he is released without charge. On June 30th, 1993, some 6 months after her brutal murder, Johanna was laid to rest in the tiny parish church near her home. Family, friends, and her boyfriend wept openly. Detectives attended the funeral and promised her parents they would not let her killer escape justice. By this point, the skull fracture had been conclusively attributed to a fall rather than any kind of strike by the killer. Detectives then put forward a new theory that Johanna may have met her killer consensually and removed her genes, but then somehow had fallen, fracturing her skull and rendering her unconscious. Mistakenly believing that she was already dead, her killer then decided to dump her into the icy water in the pit, where she then drowned. Given that Johanna weighed 10 stone, 10 pounds, it seemed highly unlikely one person could have carried her to the pit, raising the strong possibility that the killer had returned with an accomplice to dispose of her body. On December 24, 1993, the first anniversary of Johanna's murder, Watton's Christmas festivities were overshadowed once again as Murder Squad detectives descended on the village, seeking fresh information. But no new significant leads were forthcoming. And by February 1994, the investigation had ground to a halt. Detectives had taken some 2,000 statements, conducted 2,000 house-to-house inquiries, and completed over 1,000 questionnaires. They were now confident that Johanna had gone into Watton town centre and spent the evening wandering the high street searching for Ryan between 7:45 p.m. and 9 p.m, based on multiple people who had saw her alone. Yet they admitted they were no closer to identifying her killer and reiterated their belief that people in the village were shielding him. Back in the Young household, Johanna's bedroom remained untouched, a time capsule frozen on the day she left. Her walls were still covered with posters of her favorite pop groups, her school timetable pinned to the door, her pet gerbil Squeak still living in his cage on the chest of drawers, fed and cared for by the family. Her toothbrush remained in its holder in the bathroom. Her parents, too traumatized to cross the threshold, preserved the room as a shrine to their lost daughter. Robert suffered violent panic attacks and found it unbearable to walk through Watton, terrified that he might unknowingly pass the man who had taken his daughter's life. Over the coming years and decades, the case went cold. Only occasional anniversary appeals from Carol and Robert Young surfaced, met with no breakthroughs despite periodic cold case reviews from Norfolk Police. Then a dramatic shift occurred. April 2014, 2 men are then arrested. The first, a man in his 40s from the Watton area, followed shortly by a man in his 30s from the Thetford area. The two knew each other and had both lived in Watton at the time of the 1992 murder. Both were bailed and later released without charge by the summer of 2014, one formally released from bail in June, the other July. No public connection was ever made between these 2014 arrests and the earlier arrests in the case. Separately, in May 2014, a local businessman who had kept silent for the previous 21 years, confiding only in his wife, decided to come forward. He described giving a lift to a hooded, scruffy teenager who was acting strangely, disheveled and slightly distressed, off the Norwich Road near the crime scene on the night Johanna disappeared. The businessman then dropped the youth off in Skelton near the council houses, about 5 miles away. He recognized the teenager as being from Watton. The individual was never identified or arrested, but detectives described the information as a critical piece in the inquiry and used the publicity to launch yet another appeal, urging anyone in the community still holding secrets after more than 2 decades to finally speak. The 2014 developments represented the most significant progress since the early days of the investigation, yet still no charges followed. The case slipped back into the cold case limbo. Police continued to insist that the answers lay within the tight-knit Watton community. 33 years on, the ache of Johanna Young's loss endures. She was a bright, bubbly 14-year-old who loved heavy rock, sketched with a passion, and tenderly cared for her pet gerbil Squeak. She was a daughter, sister, and friend whose laughter filled Watton streets and whose dreams were stolen far too soon. Johanna deserved a full life of art, music, love, and joy. Though her story ended in tragedy, her spirit endures in every memory her family cherishes and every call for justice her parents continue to make. Rest in peace, Johanna. You are not forgotten. Thank you for watching and listening to Johanna's story. Please feel free to add your own thoughts and theories down below, and we'll see you next time.